Hi, good afternoon, everybody, and welcome. My name's Kate Berry. I'm the Program Director for Transportation and Water at Green Communities Canada. Welcome to all of you, and thank you for joining us today. Green Communities Canada acknowledges the many treaties and traditional territories of Indigenous nations throughout Canada. We are grateful for the continued work of many First Nations, Métis, and Inuit peoples who are the original caretakers of the land and waters. In our work as environmental leaders, we have a responsibility to respect Indigenous perspectives and elevate Indigenous voices. Green Communities Canada is a national nonprofit association of 20 community-based environmental organizations who work together for a vibrant, equitable, and sustainable future. Our mission is to connect community-based climate action groups through a national network to share resources, inspire innovative programming, and elevate our collective impact. We've been the leading organization promoting active school travel in Ontario since 1996. And we do this through on-the-ground programming, training, resources, events, webinars, research, and advocacy. So joining us today as the host of today's webinar is Jaime Stuckless. Jaime is a policy advocate and transportation consultant who has worked in Ontario's active transportation sector for over a decade. During this time, she's collaborated on campaigns to fund hundreds of kilometers of cycling infrastructure, to increase walking and cycling to school. She has developed and delivered cycling skills training programs and engaged thousands of community members in policy discussions. And prior to launching her independent consulting practice in 2020, Jaime worked for the Share the Road Cycling Coalition, Enviro Centre, and Green Communities Canada. She also holds a master's in geography from McMaster University and is an alumnus of the Maytree Policy School. The goal of the Ontario Active School Travel Program is to make walking, cycling, and other forms of active and sustainable transportation the norm for school trips. I just want to gratefully acknowledge the financial support of the Ontario government in our work towards that goal. The Ontario government has provided Green Communities Canada with $5 million over the past 5 years since October 2017. And that's to take active school travel to the next level across the province. This funding is allowing us to provide grants for walk and wheel to school initiatives in more than 60 communities, and to provide knowledge sharing initiatives for all Ontario communities, such as this webinar today. So thank you for being here. I really look forward to the discussion today, and I'm now pleased to turn the microphone over to our host, Jaime Stuckless.
Wonderful. So good afternoon, and thank you so much for joining us for the webinar today to talk about cycling skills training in Ontario. Before we get started, I wanted to share a brief agenda with you for the next hour of your time. We'll start with a little bit of housekeeping information about Zoom. As you will likely notice, you have joined this webinar as a Zoom webinar format, which means that you do not have control over your audio or video. You will only be seeing or hearing the panelists as part of this session. We do definitely encourage you to participate in the session though by using the question and answer or Q&A box located at the bottom of your Zoom screen. If you are having any issues with webinar, please feel free to reach out to us in the Q&A. Our host from Green Communities Canada, Jose, as well as Kate and myself will be monitoring that space to make sure no one is having any issues. And we also, of course, encourage you to use the Q&A box to share your thoughts and questions, and we'll be tracking what gets put in the Q&A throughout the session for our participant Q&A session at the end of the event. We're going to start by sharing just a little bit of context of why we are hosting this webinar, and then we will jump right into our panel discussion with our expert panelists. We will close the session with a participant Q&A, an opportunity for you to get your questions out there. And we are also lucky to have Suba from the Share the Road Cycling Coalition here, who's going to share a little bit of information about how cycling skills training fits in to the National Bicycle Friendly Community Awards program. And then we will wrap up around 2 p.m. So before I welcome our panelists to the virtual stage, we wanted to share a little bit of context for you about why we're hosting this webinar. And before I begin, I just wanted to share a note about the terminology. You know, we're referring to this idea of cycling skills training. And by that, we really mean courses and programs that teach people how to ride and handles. Sometimes this is also referred to as cycling education, and that makes sense as well. We just only chose the terminology cycling skills training specifically today to refer to courses and programs, because sometimes cycling education can have a bit of a broader context and mean awareness campaigns as well. And we're really not focused on awareness campaigns today. It's really about courses and programs that teach people about riding bicycles. So I hope that that terminology makes sense to everyone. And so we're here today because we see a really great value in delivering cycling skills training programs in schools, but because we're also experiencing significant gaps and challenges in terms of things like funding, a lack of provincial or national coordination, as well as issues with the availability of instructors during the school day, amongst other things. In many communities, local organizations, municipalities, and agencies have stepped up and secured funding to launch cycling skills training programs in their communities. As we will hear from our panelists today, these programs have been really impactful and they are reaching thousands of students. However, this locally focused approach means that there are many communities in Ontario that don't have access to any program. It also can lead to a lot of duplication of efforts where each local community works to develop their own model, their own curriculum, their own instructor training and resources. And so, there's an opportunity to share information and expertise. Despite the lack of overall provincial or federal coordination and funding at the moment, there are still opportunities to work together and learn from each other. As a recent example of this, I wanted to share a note about a program that was launched this year through the Ontario Active School Travel North District School Board. Earlier this year, they applied for funding and were interested in developing a local cycling skills training curriculum, in addition to purchasing some bicycles and a bike trailer. Instead of starting from scratch, they were connected with the Ride Smart program based in Hamilton, who not only helped them locate bikes to buy during the pandemic bike shortage, but also allowed them to adapt the Ride Smart curriculum instead of investing in creating a new one. So there are many opportunities for coordination like this to be happening across programs and regions in Ontario. While there are ongoing efforts to secure funding for cycling skills training from upper levels of government, including efforts as part of the recently announced National Active Transportation Strategy, in the meantime, we wanted to facilitate connections like the one that was made between RideSmart and the Near North School District amongst programs in Ontario, so that we can keep cycling skills training moving forward and share more resources and expertise. This webinar is just one initial step towards this, and we're really fortunate to have several program representatives joining us today to share not only their expertise, but also some replicable resources for you to use in your community. I wanted to note that in addition to the 4 representatives participating in the panel today, there are many great organizations and programs in Ontario that are not included today, like Bike Friendly Windsor Essex, Safe Cycling Thunder Bay, and Cycling into the Future, to name a few. This is obviously a much longer conversation than we could fit into a 1-hour event, but with our recent experiences in the Near North, we really wanted to get started on this conversation about collaboration and sharing resources through the Ontario Active School Travel Network. As a note, today's webinar is being recorded as an ongoing resource for you and your peers in your communities. It will be posted on the Ontario Active School Travel website, along with links to the available resources that are being shared and mentioned by panelists today. We'll be sharing all of this information about where to find it on the website with everybody who signed up for this webinar via Eventbrite, and it will also be shared through the Ontario Active School Travel Network newsletter. So now, let's get started with the panel, and I will invite the panelists to begin appearing on screen and turning on their audio and video as I introduce them. So today we're going to invite Andrew Hibma, who is the Executive Director of New Hope Community Bikes and has been with the organization for 11 years. Andrew is a CAN bike instructor, a seasoned bike mechanic, and developed the Ride Smart program 7 years ago to address a recognized need for fundamental cycle education in schools. Since then, Andrew has helped launch a bike program and shipping container bike shop in Pikangikum, Ontario, and will be spending much of his summer traveling to parts of Northern Ontario with a trailer full of bikes, delivering the Ride Smart program in new communities. We're also joined by Jaime Akiyama, who is the program coordinator at Peterborough GreenUP and chair of Active School Travel Peterborough. Jaime coordinates community and school-based active transportation programs and partners with Bike, the community bike shop, to deliver cycling education programs like pedal power, bike rodeos, community bike nights, and community cycling events. Kristin Schwartz is a mom to a teenage daughter, a utilitarian cyclist, a community worker, and a lifelong learner. She has led CultureLink's cycling and environmental programs since 2010 in partnership with Cycle Toronto and other cycling organizations. Kristin played a lead role in the Toronto District School Board's adoption of the Charter for Active, Safe, and Sustainable Transportation and worked with Metrolinx to launch Bike to School Week in Greater Toronto and Hamilton. And we're also joined by Sabat Ismail, who is a master's student at York University in its Faculty of Environmental and Urban Change. For years, Sabat has worked at several DIY bike hubs, as well as at municipalities working to support cycling and cycling education programs. So, thank you so much to our panelists, who I believe are all on screen now. This is wonderful. I think, we are all here to hear what you have to say about cycling skills training. So I'm going to jump right in. We've formatted this panel around 3 questions that I've drafted and shared with the panelists, and they are meant to spark conversation and share information. And following that, we will of course have time for participants to share questions as well. As part of the introduction, panelists have been invited, if they want, to optionally share a slide that explains their program visually while they also talk about their program verbally. So we have a few speakers with slides and a few without. So I'm going to start by asking the first question of Jaime Akiyama. What advice do you have for communities looking to run cycling skills training programs as part of their active school? Over to you, Jaime.
Thanks, JB. Hello, everyone. I am here on behalf of GreenUP and Bike, the community bike shop, because we partner to deliver pedal power. And you can see from my slide there a little bit of details about pedal power, so I'll leave that there for you. But just to get right into the advice that we've been asked to share, as a team, we came up with some ideas about what advice we would give from our experiences. And the first thing we thought of was to build partnerships, because we think the partnerships are super important. And it was really helpful, to tap into the different strengths of each partnership. For example, we had worked with Bike, the community bike shop, on some community and adult programs. And so we had that relationship already. And then we saw an opportunity to bring cycling education to youth through schools. And we were able to build on the strengths that we both had. So Bike, the community bike shop, had all the expertise with the bike skills and the mechanics and all that. But GreenUP had over 20 years of experience delivering education programs and strong connections already with schools and school boards. So it allowed us to build the programs with those two expertise, and it allowed us to pilot the new programs easier because GreenUP already had a reputation for great school programming and a good relationship with some teachers. So schools and teachers were willing to take the risks and, you know, pilot projects and try out ideas that we had, which we thought was really helpful. So building out those partnerships and the strengths that your partners build. We also thought a really good advice was to really consider equipment and make sure you have bikes and helmets so that everyone has access to the equipment that you will allow everyone to participate. A big piece that allowed us to start off was a grant that helped us develop a small fleet of bikes, and also allowed us the funding to maintain the bikes. So we have kids on safe, functional bikes when they're starting to learn, which is really important. And we have a program with the small fleet now, and we also have extra helmets so that everyone can participate. During Pedal Power, our first session is to include a bike mechanic that will do a quick bike safety check on all, even personal equipment that is brought by participants, so that we can make sure everyone has safe and can participate properly, which has been really, really important through the program. So something to consider working into your program. Another piece of advice was we were able to lean on partners a bit to diversify our funding. Again, partners were super helpful with that. And we were working with a longstanding active school travel group in Peterborough and had some key access to resources and different funding opportunities. And as we all might know, cycling ticks a lot of boxes of different benefits and impacts, you know, from environmental, physical, mental health, sports and recreation, transportation, we could go on and on. So all our partners really helped us reach out to all those different options for funding, which is great. And then my last little bit, so I'll be quick here, is when we were developing the curriculum for our program, it was really nice that there's lots of different options or different types of cycling education out there. So we really didn't want to reinvent the wheel, so they say. So we did a lot of research on existing curriculum and best practices and tried to develop the curriculum and program formula that meets our needs. So there was a lot of tweaking and looking at different things, but we really wanted it to be based on local schools and community situations and the funding and resources that we required. So for example, Peterborough has an extensive multi-purpose trail network, and therefore we thought it was important to include training on trail etiquette as part of our curriculum. We reached out to different places that had those type of resources and then integrated it into ours. Similar, when we were doing our research, we found research that things like stats on exiting a driveway, is a high collision data for our target audience, which is grade 5. So we felt that was important. So don't reinvent the wheel, use all of the resources out there, but really fine tune them to your specific community. Yeah. Thanks, Jaime. I was trying to hurry there, but I think that's all for now.
Thanks, Jaime. All right, now we're going to have Andrew, who also has a slide visually representing some information about the RideSmart program, answer our question about what advice Andrew has from his extensive experience with RideSmart.
Great. Well, thanks. And I would definitely echo a lot of the things that Jaime has already said in terms of access to bikes. I think that's a big one. And that's why we went ahead and started the program in 2015, providing bikes, because we would go to schools where they'd have a program where almost every student in the school would receive a bike, and we'd show up to do some cycle education pieces, and maybe only 10 of the kids had brought their bike, because there's always a barrier to getting a kid their bike to school, whether it's they take the bus or it's too far, or they're, maybe they live with their mom and their bike's at their dad, something like that. So by bringing the bikes, it definitely overcomes that barrier. So I think that's a have to or a necessary. But then in terms of when we started the program, we found what was really beneficial was to take what we called it a top-down, bottom-up approach for really getting the program into the school. So top, we're talking about the trustees and the principals, and kind of reaching out to those, looking through our networks of people that we knew in our organization and who we could, so we would present the material to the trustees and the principals and say, this is what we'd like to do in your school. But then we'd also go kind of bottom up. So we'd talk to parents, so parent advisory councils and students as well. So they could advocate for the program and bring the program to your school. Because being an outside organization trying to bring a program into a school, you can face a lot of barriers, especially if you don't have a really large reputation behind you of what you've done before. So when you're starting off something new, you really have to take that top down, bottom up approach. So, and then the second thing for advice I would say is just don't assume that everybody in that, say, grade 4 and up range can already ride a bike. We found that about 10% of the students, whenever we would deliver a program, weren't able to ride a bike already by themselves. So we always made sure that we had someone who could work alongside those students. We would remove the pedals and start with just kind of a scootering motion and then build up to being able to ride. We spread out our program over the course of a week so that there was an instruction period each day of the week, and that allowed there to be kind of that mental break and as well as the muscle memory to develop so that the students would actually be able to learn to ride by the end of the week. And that was a great success. And to be able to celebrate and to know that, that student will probably remember that experience for the rest of their life, because there's something that cements inside your head that moment when you pedaled for the first time. So yeah, thanks.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Andrew. So now I'm going to stop my screen share and move into kind of more of a dialogue conversation between the panelists. So maybe Kristin, could you go next and offer some of the advice that you have from your experience?
Sure, thanks. So I've worked on a whole variety of cycling programs in Toronto for newcomers, for marginalized residents, and for students. And between 2016 and 2019, with support of Trillium Foundation, we really ramped up our in-school programs and reached over 10,000 students per year. And those programs would range from 30-minute sort of assemblies to on-bike instruction and support for after-school bike clubs. In elementary schools, students would bring their own equipment for the on-bike programs, while in secondary schools, we could supply them. The other funders beyond OTF were the school board itself, individual schools, and furthermore, the Bike to School Week campaign with Cycle Toronto has been supported by Metrolinx and then by the Ontario After School Travel Program. I would say that for us, developing a bike-friendly culture has been a priority, along with the cycling skills training. And basically all of our programs are shorter than what sort of cycling education experts would consider ideal. And this is in large part because of our school board is massive, and to sort of even make a dent in it, to have an impact on the overall, to have a profile in the school board, we just needed to reach more people, and we needed to do that in shorter time increments than, the 5 days that, we would love to do with every student. So overall, we would recommend working closely with your school board to develop your program offering. We have a very strong relationship with the Eco Schools program at the TDSB, and they actually promote the program and select which schools participate and so on. So it's they're doing that part of it for us. Our biggest recommendation, I think, would be to really focus on the training of the educators, of the skills trainers, because as we know, the CAN bike program is really under supported in Canada, in Ontario. Like, there's just not a lot of people that actually teach this stuff, and we're kind of starting from scratch. And now that we've done it for many years, we have a kind of a pool of people that have been through it, that have the experience. And all of our people get the CAN bike level 4, they do first aid, they do concussion training, they all get their police reference check, of course. All of these pieces take time and energy to accomplish. And then we have 3 days of our own training on our curriculum on the specific types of things that come up. And I would say that this sort of goes to the last question around equity, that training educators to try to address the needs and the skills and the capacities of different, students coming from different places, is really important. And by having the people come back year over year, we can kind of learn from the past and share that knowledge among the group. So I think that's what I can add to this discussion today.
And something that I would like to add, I've collaborated actually with Kristin and worked at different CultureLink programs. So I've been involved with the CultureLink Bike Hub as well as the Bike to School project. And something that I feel like may be useful to take away with respect to cycling skills training is one, identifying where partners can be made, identifying if you're looking to create some sort of program or initiative, locating where there's already cycling happening. So TCAT in the work that I was doing incubating suburban cycling, one of the ways that they identified community bike hubs was looking at where in neighborhood cycling is already happening so that support can be further fostered and like built upon. So that's one thing that I would note. And then also a lot of municipalities do have cycling and pedestrian advisory committees that can be helpful. And also starting one may also be helpful. Sometimes like, again, with like many of us in this sector, it can be frustrating how slow change sometimes can happen. And like, I think that can also be the case with some folks on those committees, but it allows you to build connections and build power. And one more thing that I'd like to add is I remember Marvin from Scarborough Cycles was once on a panel, and something really insightful that he was discussing when it came to building partnerships is he was saying that it's not that like people directly may directly be interested in cycling. However, there is shared interests when it comes to like public health, which is connected to cycling, and initiatives related to or interest in the community with getting people outside. And even in general, something he's also saying is like having the hub, a lot of these hub spaces are in already existing community spaces. So having people already comfortable in those kinds of environments, that makes them more welcome to the idea of cycling. And youth in the community that oftentimes rely on community centers, it can get them interested in cycling in that way. So that's one thing I would like to add.
That's great. Thank you so much, Sabat, for taking the lead and getting started with your advice while I muted myself, so I couldn't introduce you, but thank you for doing that and for your advice. Lots of great information shared here, some partnerships, the idea of looking for where cycling is already happening, considering equipment access, as well as, looking for ways to make sure we're not reinventing the wheel. I tried to come up with something catchy to talk about like keeping the wheel rolling instead of reinventing it, but maybe that's not necessary. We're kind of getting that through the conversation anyways. So, the next question we had, you guys have all been involved in this for a little while now, and getting an understanding of, in this work, have there been any unexpected barriers or challenges that have come up? And if yes, how did you address them in a way that might be helpful for our webinar participants to know? Maybe this time, could we start with Andrew?
Sure. So, yeah, we've definitely overcome a lot of these challenges along the way, but they definitely still persist. One of the big ones that came to mind is just the process. Being an outside organization, booking the schools and the programming, it can be kind of a full-time job for the first 3 months of the year, lining up the schools to fill our schedule for Ride Smart programming. And then you basically have to do it all over again in the fall to get schools on board if you want to do any programming in the fall. And we found that communication with schools is very difficult throughout the summer. So you're kind of into October before you can really book a school solidly in. And then, so ultimately you can only do about 6 months of programming at most. And then your fleet or whatever equipment and resources, staffing, just kind of sits throughout the year. So you have to staff up for the spring because you can run more and more programming, but you're not able to offer that as a like full-time long-term position, which is a challenge, keeping good staff if you can't employ them through the winter as well. And then the other one that we've run into, and this kind of varies probably school board to school board, but for us, we found a lot of opposition to the idea of even taking the kids off of the school property. So where you want to actually teach those on-road skills, where you want to be able to teach students how to use the cycling infrastructure that may exist, there was a lot of pushback about that. We were involved in a kind of bike to school, bike train idea, and when they tried to restart it in the spring, we were kind of slapped by the school board and said, no, we can't even promote that within the school. So, I mean, that was a number of years back. Maybe that's changed now, but definitely the risk liability side has been always something to balance. And that's why we've been excited by the near north perspective, where it's coming from the school board and going out to the students rather than being a third party coming in and saying, oh, we want your students to do this. So.
Thanks for that. I think many of us have experienced it's easy to underestimate how much work it can be to book and coordinate and communicate about those courses. So thanks for sharing that. Sabat, would you be willing to go next and share some barriers or challenges?
Sure. A barrier and a challenge that comes up, especially in DIY bike spaces, is like gender and how women and trans and gender non-conforming folks feeling like uncomfortable in the space, or sometimes where there's kind of a bro culture in some community bike spaces. And also, I just want to clarify, DIY means do-it-yourself bike spaces. So in these DIY bike hubs, some of them, they do have hours for women and girls and trans folks, but oftentimes, like, because women have, like, it can be like a cycle where it's like, oh, there's not enough women to run the space, or we don't have women staff to run the space, women and trans staff to run the space, and then you can't hold those hours or and have like a fixed period of time. And then also when it comes to like metrics, it may not look like if there sometimes there's oftentimes a decrease in people coming in when there's that set period of time, like during women and trans hours. However, that doesn't mean that the space isn't valuable. And even related to that, at different community bike hubs with the city, a lot of things are measured in terms of how many bikes are repaired with the current program that the City of Toronto is running with solid waste management, how many bikes are repaired, and all of that. However, these also don't lend themselves to like making the program more equitable in some ways, like for example, with women and trans hours, or when it comes to a lot of in certain communities I was working in, women were less likely to bike, and then we didn't have the kind of programs that would help them learn how to bike, and that's not measured by the metrics that the city has. It may have changed in the last few years, but not to my knowledge. But that's one barrier that's come up.
Thank you. No, that's really important to talk about kind of even the idea of how we measure impact and how we measure success and what it means for our programming to be accessible and inclusive. Thank you for highlighting those barriers that exist and that we need to be addressing in our work. Kristin, would you go next with some barriers and challenges?
Sure. So I was thinking, okay, so I think the there's some difficulty, I think, in sort of securing the appropriate amount of time in a school. You know, a lot of people who, you know, grew up biking just don't really see it as something, oh, that takes time to learn, right? If you haven't done it. So it, you know, or don't kind of recognize just the amount of time it takes to set up the fleet and make sure that it's, you know, all the tires are pumped up and, you know, all of that stuff. It all takes longer than you think, right? And every step of the education process. So I think, I mean, over time, it's gotten better for us, but I think working with newer schools or newer folks, like they just might not get it, you know, that there's a lot of moving parts, so to speak. And I think, yeah. And I suppose, yeah, the cost of the equipment and moving it around and the storage of it, you know, it's not, we've stored our equipment at schools, but you know, that's never a guarantee that we can keep it there forever, you know, or that we have access to it. So it's a lot of communication, which is fine. But you know, like again, that kind of overhead cost and time isn't something that people will necessarily think about, right?
So important to highlight. This isn't just about training instructors and saying, go teach cycling skills training. There's really a lot of coordination and support required to make it happen. So thank you. And Jaime, could you share, you know, some thoughts on the barriers and challenges you've experienced?
Yeah, I do share a lot of the challenges that have already been spoken about, like just the logistics of everything, getting it organized, dealing with the school boards, even though they're quite willing and eager, the scheduling nightmares that go on with trying to book. And for us, it's often related to equipment. As Kristin was just saying, like moving a fleet around. We are a pretty small organization. We don't have, or we didn't work into it yet, a truck to carry around. We have 20 bikes in our fleet, and how do we move them around? And we're working with several schools at a time. How do we move back and forth? And there's like a lot of logistical things that really are a challenge for us. But the biggest one I think we battle with every year, and Andrew mentioned this slightly, but was the retention of instructors because of the short-term contract. You know, ours is actually even shorter. We've historically run our program just over 2 months. So trying to retain, you know, quality instructors over years where you're only offering like an 8-week contract is quite difficult and understandable, of course, but that's a challenge that we deal with every year to try to keep that going. But, you know, there's lots of good people out there, but it's sometimes hard to offer them an 8-week contract. It would be lovely to, you know, offer them annual work or something like that, or, you know, there's lots of ways around it, but that's what we deal with every year.
Thank you.
If I could just say, like, we never tried to offer full-time work. We always kept it part-time because then it could be somebody who had something else going on that it would sort of fit with their life, you know, because somebody who's looking for a full-time job, they're not going to be able to like take it for 3 months and then stop and then come back, you know, a year later. Like it's just not going to happen. So we sort of looked for people that had that flexibility in their life, and that meant reducing the expectations and not promising them full-time work during the period, the high period.
Yeah, and I just jump on, that's exactly what I was thinking. Like you have to look at your community and what you can offer and make whatever works for specific for your program and your community.
Yeah, I think these are challenges that are experienced by a lot of communities that are working to implement cycling skills training. So even just sharing them and getting them on the radar and you know, being able to know what to look out for when getting started, but also hopefully moving forward through the Ontario Active School Travel Network, being able to have like brainstorming and sharing to address these challenges as well would be very valuable. So we're going to move on to our last question, and I've, you know, kind of been assigning people to speak, but you know, whoever would like to jump in with their thoughts on this. We wanted to talk about what's being done and what should be done to ensure that the cycling skills training programming that is being offered are equitable, inclusive, and accessible to all students.
I think one, to be very, like, for the instructors and for the people creating the program to be like very aware of their like positionality when they're coming into this, and like where the systems in power and privilege that like inform how they move through the world, and also like end up informing how they're instructing students and creating these kinds of programs, and also how the programming and like I would arguably say themselves as like themselves will work to make it so that like the programming and like the world broadly is more equitable. But for more tangible things, I would say that something that would come up, or something that comes up, are sometimes things like collaborating with the police and like law enforcement, and how that might make more marginalized students feel, especially students in like heavily surveilled and policed neighborhoods. And so I'd advise to speak with students and also like be mindful of how that might put them in a more vulnerable situation. And then two, I would also say that like something that would come up, inequity and like racism and biases would also affect how people like approach these programs or like feel comfortable in these spaces. For example, there are renewed conversations surrounding Islamophobia at this moment, and like something that I was remembering was when I was working at the Gateway Bike Hub, which is in Flemington Park on the border of Thorncliffe Park too, though. There's like a large amount, a majority of people that come into the hub and like live in the neighborhood are Muslim. And something that would come up is when I was talking to people in the community or people outside the community about the women in trans hours that we were trying to run. People assume, like there was assumptions about how women were cycling less because of culture, and like there's of course like it's not just culture, there's an Islamophobic undertone to that, and so like that and those kind of perceptions too affect like the people coming into the program that have Muslim backgrounds, the women coming into the program, and also how in general Muslim women are affected when they go into different community organizations, if they are experiencing harm, if sexism is informing their experience in a certain situation or from their families, like they feel like they don't have the space to discuss that at all because of the assumption is it's because they're Muslim. And one more thing I would say, sorry to go on a tangent, but something that would come up when it comes to community bike shops and those that are volunteer run, and it came up, I've attended the conference Bike a few times, which is a North America wide conference for community bike hubs, but something that would come up is how a lot of the volunteers are running these programs, because most of them are volunteer run, are white, and a lot of them are operating in racialized neighborhoods. And like, it's important to be aware of those dynamics and be aware of also, let's say, is it perhaps playing into gentrification, and a conversation that would come up at these different sessions at these different conferences is also how to like challenge like the white savior conflicts that can come up with some of these like bike shops operating again in majority racialized neighborhoods, like can look different and in different places and look different along the lines of class and race, of course, in different contexts. But I'd encourage people to like not shy away from these things, especially because marginalized people cannot shy away from like how they move through the world. So yeah, I went on a bit of a tangent, but that's what I can say, would say about that. And I can answer some more questions related to that if we have some time.
Thank you so much for sharing that, Sabat. Not a tangent at all. You provided some really tangible examples of things to be working on, as well as thank you for highlighting the need to, not only tackle this, the specific examples, but also in order to create truly safe streets and spaces for everyone, that we also need to be doing the broader work of eliminating racism and discrimination in the community as a whole, so that everyone can truly be safe out walking and cycling. So thank you so much for sharing your input on that. I wanted to open it up to the entire panel as well to share your thoughts on this question about making our programs equitable and inclusive. And if you would like for us to go to audience questions as well and share and continue to share your thoughts on this throughout the discussion, we can do that as well. Oh, great, Jaime.
No, I was just going to say I really like what Sabat has to say, so I don't have much to add to that really great comment, but I just wanted to do some very small things, but for our programs, they were offered free of cost, and that was a nice option. I'm not sure if that's the option that will always be going forward, but I think that's something to strive for through the schools. And I think it was really nice that we had to offer them through the schools. So there was an opportunity there for the schools to help us get them out to everybody, which is an accessible option, versus like just running them in a camp environment or through the community, which has its barriers as well. We also, and it gets back to the equipment again, making sure everyone has equipment. And we worked with a 5 counties organization here to get adaptive equipment if needed. So there's some accessibility things that went on with that as well. And then another point was made that our program, it was really nice to have the flexibility. So work into your program the capacity to be flexible with the abilities of the students of where they are when they start. So every time we've worked with a class, we've had a couple of new or non-riders. So having a program that's flexible, having the staff to be able, we have 3 instructors and a coordinator who pops in that can, have a group of non-riders and get them riding versus just delivering the curriculum to the class. So reaching them where they're at and stuff like that, I think is a really nice option to make sure everybody is included.
Great, thank you so much, Jaime. And Kristin, I see you've raised your hand too.
We've had a great uptake of our grade 9 program. And I think it's awesome because it happens during gym class. And, in grade 9, gym is a compulsory course. It hits students at a time when they're in a transition in their life. They're starting secondary school. They're going to start to be moving more independently in the world if they haven't already been. And so it's a great moment to reach them with this kind of information, that this is a way that you can move around on your own. And also gym classes in Ontario, there's often an option for a gender split class, at least in Toronto. So I don't know if it's the case everywhere, but so, I mean, not to say that this is like the perfect situation or that it helps everybody or whatever, but I mean, it does, I think, help some of the young girls, young women to experiment with a physical activity that they may not be comfortable with before, while they're, in a safer place. So again, not to say that that's perfect or a panacea for anything, but just that it does create a little bit more safety for some of the students. And yeah, I mean, having the bikes obviously is a big deal. Having bikes that are appropriately sized. Sometimes we've had problems with that. We have there's people sort of in between being children and adults or smaller adults. A lot of the bikes that are made for the North American market are made for bigger people, which is a thing, that is a barrier for some of the smaller women, especially. But so we just, every time we buy bikes, we try to buy more small ones now. What else? I had one other thought.
Maybe while you do that thought, we'll throw it over to Andrew, if Andrew wanted to add anything, and just so we can keep it moving.
I would just echo the piece before, and just the assumption on the learning to ride, because that can be that huge barrier for students. You know, they're not going to participate if they've never had the opportunity to learn to ride. So making that as easy as possible. And that's not something that's necessarily addressed in Can Bike or a lot of these established cycle training pieces come with the assumption that people have learned to ride. So I think there could definitely be some more development on that side of the curriculum. And even on our end, we don't have a whole lot of that. We have a few tips and tricks, but at the end of the day, it's a lot of just kind of perseverance and running alongside and supporting the person who's learning to ride, and kind of fostering that skill.
Great, thank you. And so I think that we're seeing a lot of great questions come through the Q&A. You guys have provided a lot of information that people are also agreeing with in the Q&A. I wanted to pause here and share, the promotions for this webinar mentioned that there is going to be the sharing of replicable resources. So I wanted to highlight, I've got a slide up here that illustrates the resources that our panelists are making available as part of the website that is being created that also will house the recording of this session. So you will be able to gain access to the pedal power manual, including some sample evaluation tools, the Bike to School Week guide, including the ABC bike check and tips on preparing for a group ride. You can also get access to the Ready to Ride assembly presentation deck for making presentations about bike safety in the community, as well as the Ride Smart manual, including program values and delivery tips. And so if it is all right with the panelists, I would love to move in to try and answer one or two of the questions that have been provided before we turn it over to Suba and the Bicycle Friendly Communities program. I do want to flag that we will save the Q&A, and some of the more specific questions, we will post the answers to them on the resource page so that everybody has them. But some of the more discussion-based questions, maybe here's a very specific one that, Andrew, maybe you could answer quickly. Just as an example, how many bikes are in your fleet that you bring to schools?
We try to keep a full class set. So that's anywhere from 25 to 35 bikes. We store them within a 14-foot trailer. And then we try to have some bikes that are 20-inch bikes, and then up to 26 or 27.5-inch wheel, now more mountain bike style. And that usually lets us cover most of grade 4 through 7. Our sweet spot has generally been the 24-inch wheel bikes, because as an adult, I can ride them myself to still demonstrate the drills. So even if there's a kid that's fairly tall, they are still able to ride that bike. It might not be the perfect fit for them, but they can still practice the skills.
Thanks, Andrew. And another one that has come up multiple times in the Q&A that was addressed briefly was just this idea of taking course participants out on the road versus staying on campus. Maybe by show of hands, raise your hand if your program takes participants out on the road. Okay. Yeah, so we've got a few. Thank you. So pedal power. Jaime, did you want to mention something about that?
I did want to mention something because, I know Andrew had said it was harder and harder with the boards, and that we do find the same thing, but we find it's specific to school. So usually principal school driven about some hesitation to doing that. So some schools have been like, yes, do it, let's do this. And others have not really wanted to go that way for whatever reason. So, but we usually try to incorporate it. We have a 5-session program, and we usually try to incorporate a little bit of a road trip to somewhere on the road to demonstrate the skills and have like real life application of the skills on the last day or something like that, which we have found works well when the school is open to it.
I think, I don't know if you've got this experience, but we found the OFIA guidelines to be useful. I mean, when we first were pointed to them, we were intimidated because they're really long, right? Like it's a lot of things, right? But once you kind of dig into it a little bit, they're all pretty common sense and practical. And because these are the guidelines that schools tend to look to for other physical activities, you know, being able to show them and to a principal or to a superintendent and say, yes, we're following, you know, as per OFIA, you know, and so on, then it helps them to have more confidence that what we're doing is not sort of outside the norm or, you know, way dangerous or something like that, right? We did create templates to kind of simplify it, make checklists for ourselves that make a bit more sense. And a lot of that is in the back to school day guide that you highlighted that's on the Back to School Week website.
Sabat, I know that you had said, you know, sometimes yes, sometimes no on road. Was there anything that you wanted to add about that piece?
Just that we, so when I was involved with the Bike to School project, what we would do is just like look at the bike map and like try our best not to be on the road if it was on the road on quiet residential streets, just because there are people that come in with varying skill sets and people that may not feel comfortable on the road. And we want to kind of cater the rides to maybe people with like the least amount of like experience or skills when it comes to being a confident rider. So hopefully they can work their way up to eventually cycling on streets. But we tried our trails were our friends in these situations and like using cycling infrastructure. So that's what we did when I was at the Bike to School project.
Cool, thank you. And Andrew, I think you mentioned that you don't go on road. Is that because of age, insurance, a mix of things?
Yeah, it's just been a matter of not getting to that point yet with the school board in terms of yeah. So when we've done kind of a one-day version of it, we've definitely gone on the roads, but never with the schools. So, and we have piloted one or two schools where they did it, but it was a private school rather than a public school. So.
Okay, thanks. I know that was always kind of a contentious issue with the CAN Bike program, that, you know, all these skills were being taught, but then never practicing it on the road. So it's great to hear the, you know, the variety of experiences that you have had. I'll also note, because I chatted with them by phone yesterday, Cycling into the Future in Waterloo does take their students on the road as well as part of their programming. So I think there's a variety of things going on. It's great to be able to learn from each other. So with that, I really, really hate to say goodbye to this panel. I think you've been so insightful, and I really could listen to you talk about cycling skills training and cycling in general for another 2 hours. But we only booked an hour for this. So a heartfelt thank you for your time and your experience and for your generosity in sharing the resources that we're going to be putting up on the webpage as a follow-up to this webinar. So I think everyone joins me in saying thank you. And, you know, cycling skills training and education is a really important thing for municipalities to be considering as well. And it is a crucial component of the Bicycle Friendly Communities program that is now being run nationally by the Share the Road Cycling Coalition. So I'm going to share my screen, and I would like to invite Suba, the Bicycle Friendly Communities Coordinator, to join us and share a bit of information about how this all ties together. So over to you, Suba.
Thanks, Jaime. Share the Road Cycling Coalition, Velo Quebec, and the League of American Cyclists are partners in running the Bicycle Friendly Communities program in Canada and the United States. It's an application-based program, and we provide a comprehensive roadmap for communities to evaluate current conditions for cycling. Communities are adjudicated by local reviewers as well as an external judging panel, and these groups provide guidance to foster safe, bikeable communities for all ages and abilities. Yesterday, we just announced our latest award winners, and now Whitehorse Yukon is our most northern BFC. This shows that a subarctic climate is indeed bikeable. And of interest to the audience today, Whitehorse even has a safe winter commuting program for elementary students. As Jaime mentioned, comprehensive cycling skills training is critical to becoming a BFC, and it's in fact a dedicated section in our application form, along with engineering, encouragement, and evaluation and planning. It's no coincidence that the panelists you heard from are in designated BFCs. Peterborough and Hamilton are silver communities, and Toronto is a gold community. Overall, we have 46 BFCs in Ontario, 14 in Quebec, and 6 in other parts of Canada. So if you'd like to learn more about the BFC program and to apply for an award, our next deadline is October 8th. And information is available at sharetheroad.ca, or you can email me, bfc@sharetheroad.ca.
Well, thank you so much, everybody. Thank you, Suba. I'm glad that we were able to hear from you at the end of our session. Thank you to all of our panelists. I really appreciate you sharing your time and expertise today. And a huge thank you to Jaime Stuckless for pulling this together and being our host today. I hope you all enjoyed the discussion, and we look forward to continuing collaborating and sharing with you all. So look out for an email in your inbox coming soon with links to all of the resources that we talked about today and a recording of this session. Have a great day, and hope to see you again soon. Take care.
Thank you.